Hi, I'm Chris McDonough from Inside Extension for Agriculture and working with Mallee Sustainable Farming on the saline land projects. And today we're just looking at, can you use more salt tolerant varieties as a strategy to help in your overcoming of dry saline land or magnesia country? So as you might have picked up in the animation on the decision tree, that plant roots and the fine root hairs, the way that plants get water into their system is by creating salts um, within their system that then through osmotic pressure draws water and nutrients into their roots. Um, but when the salt becomes too prevalent in the soil, then that makes it harder for that to happen, and the roots fail to be able to function and die. But certain varieties have the ability to absorb water in and exclude salt out of their system, which makes them more salt tolerant, while other varieties such as saltbush have the ability to take more water and salt into their system, and then they can exude the salt out of their leaves to help them survive. So we had a number of trials around the place, like this one at Tikara. And the difficulty is a lot of these patchy salt land areas, it's very hard to do direct comparisons very accurately between species and varieties because of the variation in salinity in all the patches. And it's not as consistent as, say, what we would be hoping for in an NVT trial. But we have been able to pick up some things. For instance, that was the Mulgara oats growing quite well in a situation where everything else wasn't growing. And in each of these areas, the canola and the safflower generally showed a bit more tolerance, whereas a lot of the pulse varieties really did struggle. Um, and yeah, definitely not so salt tolerant. So there was other sites as well where just cereals were looked at. But yeah, as I said, some safflower and canola did well at this particular site, as did the barley and the oats. Yeah, so there was quite a bit of variation in some of the wheat varieties, but a lot of that could be put down to the patchiness of the sites. So just taking those barley and oats varieties, just some work in the mallee here. Yes, they're probably the best options for these areas that have got patches of dry saline land, and probably they will fill in a lot more in those wetter starts to the season. But the reality is that there's no silver bullet for the ground when it gets highly saline, and as shown here. So this is interesting. This is a site, it's actually near Alford, where we put a whole lot of different varieties, but it is a mallee seep, so it's quite saline. Gradually become a lot more saline down here in the basin, and um, there are certain varieties though that were quite salt tolerant, such as Puxinalia, that were able to grow right through that. So water's not an issue here; it's just the salt. And so yeah, just you can see various differences there. This is your Puxinalia as well as your tall wheatgrass, which is another salt tolerant variety, not quite as tolerant as Puxinalia, but still did well and is used a lot in mallee seep situations. Ryegrass also pops up because that's fairly salt tolerant as well. So the question is, can we use this in some of these dry saline land areas? Well, this is a mallee seep area near Lake Callalaraine in the Victorian Mallee, and it's very hard in these really low rainfall areas to get it established. Like we used Puxinalia and tall wheatgrass, and it's only after the right conditions and you really get a good rainfall to really get it going. It's very hit and miss in trying to get it established, even where there is a perched water table underneath. So trying to convert that to, this is not far away at Morkella, and this is a dry saline area, which we tried to see if we could get some cover with Puxinalia and tall wheatgrass. And yes, we got some good germination on the early rains. This is ryegrass, this is the Puxinalia, but we only had about 100 mils or less, 80 mils for the growing season, and most of this really died out. And that's the problem, where we're trying to get stuff established, but the lack of rainfall is, and the lack of not having a perched water table is really going to make it so hit and miss to try and achieve that. But at that same site, we did actually manage to get some Neptune Messina established, and it grew reasonably well. And so this is a salt-tolerant legume, a bit like Medic, and we're really going to be interested to see how well that regenerates and spreads in better seasons, but it is showing some promise, as you can see, in quite salty soil. But if it just gets too bad, then maybe it is a case of going back to saltbush, or maybe even just the native saltbush and blue bushes, or the volunteer species, and turning more back into a permanent pasture, so you can still get some production off of what otherwise would be fairly unproductive land. So just in summary, I would always go to looking at the other strategies first in terms of soil cover and maybe sand and that opportunistic use of seasonal rainfall. But the use of barley and oats is your best cereal. We talked about safflower and canola. Pulses are always going to struggle as not being very salt tolerant. It's very hit and miss to try and use Puxinalia and tall wheatgrass in these dryland areas. But Neptune Messina is something that we're going to have to do more work on to see if that could be an option into these lower rainfall areas. But at the end of the day, in the most severe extreme situations, then maybe going back to a saltbush might be your best option. Thank you very much, and I hope you found this helpful.